To get going on tonight's webinar. So first and foremost, I hope everyone is having a wonderful evening. Thank you for finding the time and thank you for joining us tonight on Quad Education's webinar, SAT ACT 101. Just a little bit of an introduction. Of course, we'll go over who our wonderful panelists are. Let me just allow individuals to pop into the room. So we'll go over who we are at Quad, what we do, and of course who our panelists are. We'll be discussing the SAT, ACT overview, how colleges use these particular scores, the key differences, question types and tips, and sort of the strategies between choosing the two, and of course a question and answer period. In terms of timeline, we're looking at running this webinar for about 30 minutes or so of content and leaving 15 minutes for a Q&A, as you see on the screen. So throughout the course of the webinar, please feel free to pop in any sort of questions you have for our panelists, and we'll try and get back to them or get back to all the questions as soon as possible. And on top of that, this webinar is recorded, so you will receive a recording within a couple of days. So a little bit about who we are here at Quad and sort of what we have to offer. So if you're new to Quad, welcome. If you've been here before, we're really excited to have you. So who is Quad and what do we do as a company? So Quad Education is a globally recognized college admissions consulting firm with the largest team of admissions counselors in the world. With a 98% success rate, our students are actually 11 times more likely to get accepted at their top choice college. We assist students from 6th grade to undergraduate transfer candidates in applying to their dream schools. We are firm believers in starting the college application process as early as possible. For our middle schoolers and early high schoolers, we offer something called a college candidacy and profile development program. So this process focuses on building each student's resume to highlight their strengths. We want the candidate to stand out, so we will work with your student to identify clubs and leadership positions, find extracurricular activities and volunteer opportunities, and of course, assist in building next year's class schedule. Our college development program extends outside of the classroom and of course the regular school year. Since schools are looking at more than academics these days, our counselors also help plan summer activities. These can include summer courses, internships, shadowing, research opportunities, and giving back to the community through service projects. Once we've helped shape an outstanding candidate, we extend our support in shaping the perfect application. We're here to help with comprehensive application support, from picking the right major to building a balanced list of schools, activity list creations, obtaining letters of recommendation, interview prep, and applying to scholarships. Our admissions counselors are also essay writing experts who will brainstorm, outline, and edit your supplemental essays and personal statements until they are perfect. These essays serve as a platform to showcase the best aspects of our students, drawing connections between their individual life journeys and the overarching themes of each school they happen to be applying to. Whether it's your main application or those extra essays for scholarships, we've got your back with unlimited edits. Overall, our goal is to build the perfect candidate and application. We utilize every tool in our skill set to ensure the products we create with our students stand out from the rest of the pack. If you're interested in learning more about us and our packages, we offer personalized free consultations, which we, of course, encourage you to take advantage of via video, phone, or email, ensuring individualized support. Our admissions counselors are always ready and willing to help you through the process, so you don't have to navigate it alone, no matter where you are in the process. With that being said, I'd love to introduce our panelists. Well, let them introduce themselves and get going with the rest of this webinar.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Dominique. I'm super happy to be here tonight to talk to you all about standardized testing. I have been an admissions counselor here with Quad for the last couple of years. I have background working adjacent to the admissions office when I was an undergraduate at Dartmouth College working as a tour guide. And then I was also able to serve as an alumni interviewer after graduating from Dartmouth. I actually do have quite a bit of experience with the SAT and ACT as well. I worked for a private tutoring company for quite a while, ACT tutoring, and did a lot of work in the public high school setting, helping students with SAT prep, specifically with math, but kind of all throughout as well. I work pretty frequently with students across all grade levels in high school as a quad counselor to help them kind of get through this part of their preparation, their college preparation journey. And I'm excited to be here to talk about what goes into that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maisha. I've been with Quad for about a year and a half now. My background is that I did my undergraduate studies at Columbia University studying neuroscience, and I went on to do my PhD at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. I'm now a biotech scientist, but I love to continue mentoring students. I've been dabbling in mentoring since my undergrad, even high school to undergrad years. I've worked with students who are high schoolers, middle schoolers, graduate students, undergrads. I really enjoy doing these webinars to help spread more information and more details about a lot of different parts of the college application process, because we know this is a really exciting and stressful time for everyone, but we want to make it as smooth as possible. So very happy to be here.
All right, awesome. So I will kick us off just with a little bit of an introduction. What are the SAT and ACT, just so we're all on the same page. So the purpose of these exams are to be standardized tests that colleges can use to basically assess your readiness for the upper level coursework that you might see at the university level. And so they're both relatively similar, kind of on the surface. They consist of multiple choice questions. They cover reading, writing, math, etc. Just kind of those basic academic subjects that are pervasive throughout all different types of things that you might study in college. But they are really a great way to compare applicants in, again, using this word in this very standardized way. Sometimes if you just submit your grades, you may have gotten a B in a class, but maybe another student across the country who took the same class got an A, just because there's some variability, of course, in how teachers grade, etc. So this is just another great data point to say we know that these two students took the exact same test, and we know exactly that level of rigor of the test. So it's definitely something that colleges look to just get, again, that standardized kind of baseline score for students. Little bit of history. We won't spend too much time on this, but the SAT did come first. It was first administered in 1926 by the College Board, and then the ACT came along a few years later in 1959, and so that was just kind of an alternative to the SAT. We'll talk a lot today about the differences between the two and how you might go about choosing which one might be a better fit for you. And another key point, which we'll talk about later today as well, is that both of these tests have evolved quite a bit over the years. Even, as recently as this past year, when the SAT underwent a pretty radical shift from paper to digital. And with that, a lot of the content stayed the same, but the way it's structured actually changed quite a bit. And so it's just definitely something to keep in mind, that maybe something you're excited about, and maybe you want specifically to, take the SAT because you think you'll do better on a digital format or something like that. But we'll go into more depth. That is just kind of the high level overview for today.
Yeah, so I'll start with just the SAT structure and format. This is again, a high level view. We'll go more into detail in the further slides, but the SAT has two sections, the reading and writing section, which is around 64 minutes, split into two 32-minute modules, and it has a total of 54 questions. There's also the math section, which is 70 minutes, split into two 35-minute modules with 44 questions. In terms of timing, the total duration now is 2 hours and 14 minutes. This is shorter than it used to be now that it is in digital format. Each section remains timed. And yes, same thing, but the reading is a little bit shorter than the math. Even though there are more questions, it does make sense when you start doing your practice tests that you do end up answering the reading and writing questions more quickly than actually having to do math. So don't worry about that.
All right, awesome. And I'll jump in with, again, just kind of the basic high level overview of the ACT. Quite a few more sections here. And so they do split out English, math, reading, science, and an optional writing section. And so something that if you have done any research in the past on the SAT, it did used to have an optional essay section, and it no longer does. And so if this is a place where you think you'll shine, or if you are very specifically applying to a college program where you really want to go into creative writing or something like that, that could be another great data point to provide to the program that you're looking into. You'll see here that the ACT is a little bit longer than the SAT. And so that's also something to keep in mind. If you struggle to stay focused for a significant period of time, it may make more sense for you to go with the SAT to just get that done a little bit more quickly. One other thing I'll note, it's, a lot of people, when they think of the ACT, the science section kind of stands out to them. That doesn't feel like maybe something you've seen on other standardized tests you've taken, or maybe something you've expected. I always like to say the science section really in a lot of ways is just like reading section number 2. It is very much based in, different topics in science, so like biology, chemistry, physics, all of those things. But really what you're getting is some sort of passage where you're reading about some sort of biological principle, or you're getting like a physics lab report where you're actually having to dissect the graphs and charts and read those and interpret those. And so it's kind of comprehension of science-based literature, as opposed to, do you know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, or whatever, other kind of very specific science knowledge you might be learning in your science classes. So I just want to be super clear about that.
Let's take a step back and just reiterate what the role of these standardized tests are in college admissions. So like you all know, the SAT and or the ACT are a big part of your application, but they're not the only part of your application. So Dominic had mentioned that it is, primarily in place to provide a standardized measure. Everyone's taking the same exact test, so it is one way to kind of assess the level of comprehension, intellect of different students. But this is only one part of the process. Just because someone doesn't do well on the SAT doesn't mean they're not a great candidate. So what this whole application process, review process is called is holistic, basically meaning that it encompasses a lot of different items. So this includes GPA, extracurriculars, essays, personal statements, letters of rec. So just keep in mind that these test scores are just one small portion of your whole application.
Awesome. Great. So one thing I'll just add to that last slide, 100%, these are just kind of one piece. Like we mentioned, it can kind of help to maybe put your grades in context as well. Maybe you didn't do so well in some of your math classes and you just absolutely knock the SAT math out of the park, right? That's awesome. That shows, okay, you've grown a lot. You've put in the work to study and really bring your skills kind of up to speed here, even though maybe you didn't do so well in freshman algebra 1 because you didn't have the study skills yet or whatever it was. And so it can certainly be helpful to you in that way. Another thing I'll say is, again, definitely just one piece of the puzzle here. But if you have been following kind of the news and the trends over the last few years, a lot of schools went away from requiring standardized testing, starting with COVID and then kind of, through all of that and through the last few years. The trend is that schools are starting to move back towards testing being a required component of a complete application. And so it's just something to keep in mind. A few years ago, students were not as worried about it. They weren't testing and weren't really thinking about it as much. Schools are seeing the value in it. And so it's important to be prepared to take these tests and take them seriously once again. To kind of move on to this next piece, we'll talk a little bit about score reporting. And so you do have, you can take the test as many times as you'd like. There is no limit to that, but you only have to send the scores that you are proud of from the test dates that you would like. And so you don't have to, your schools are not going to see every single test administration you've taken. And so if you do take it and you don't do so well, you don't have to show them those scores. One thing that some schools will allow, and you'll need to check their specific policies when you're applying, is what's called super scoring. And that's where you can basically take two completely separate test administrations and combine them to get your best section score, and combine them into one composite score. So just for an example, let's say you took the SAT a year ago and then you take it again today and you hope that you did better. Well, you did do better on the reading section, but you did not do better on the math section. You can take your high reading score from this administration, your high math score from the one you took last year, combine those to come up with another score that's going to be higher than your two individual scores from those two test dates. And so that is something that some colleges will allow you to do. Some will not. They will not consider that. And so that's another piece of the puzzle when you're thinking about, well, how many times do I need to take this? Am I happy with my score? Am I going to take it again? Just kind of understand the policies for the specific schools that you're targeting. The other thing, just to talk about how these tests are scored. So SAT scores can range from 400 to 1600. Each of the two sections, you'll get a score out of 800, which will combine to that 1600. On the ACT, you can get a score from 1 through 36 on each of the 4 individual sections. And then they're basically just averaged to a composite score or a total score out of 36. Colleges, just to be super clear, do not have a preference as to which tests you take. And so they will evaluate these kind of in the context of, whichever test you've taken. And so the way that they can do that is they kind of standardize the 2 scores, and they can, there's tables, you can just Google it and you'll find it online. An ACT 34 is equivalent to, whatever it might be on the SAT. It's probably close to like a 15 something, right? And so that'll be the way that they can compare the two. Another way that they can do that is through percentiles. And so, you may get a score of 1450 on the SAT. I think I just looked this up today, actually. So I know for sure that's 96th percentile. And so that means you did better than 96% of other people that have taken this test. And so that's a good way for them to kind of compare you to the general mass of high school students that are taking this exam. And so understanding percentiles, understanding how the 2 scores kind of correlate with one another can help you gauge how you're doing on the 2 tests compared to one another. And maybe, eventually once you start to get into the prep, which test you're going to kind of target and focus on.
So I'd love to quickly step in and just see if we have any sort of questions in the chat thus far. Let me pop in there. So somebody asked, what are the emails and numbers we can use to contact you? Fantastic question. You can either scan the QR code you see on screen, or I also did put a link in the chat as well. So a question that we often get, especially having gone from a pen and paper SAT to the digital SAT. So I'd love to open up this question to the both of you, but has the test itself increased in difficulty?
I don't believe it's increased in difficulty. I think it may be more difficult for some students, specifically because the math section is now adaptive. And what that means is while you're taking the math section, the questions are flashing across your screen, right? So you get question 1, you input your answer, you click continue. It's not going to tell you whether it was right or wrong, but it will know whether it was right or wrong kind of immediately, and it will spit out a different question for you based on if you got it wrong or right. And so if you miss that question, you're going to get another easy question, or a question that potentially is easier. If you get that question correct, it's going to level you up and give you a harder question. And so that can kind of be tricky for students that are not used to that and kind of throw them off. The content itself is no different. The content itself, hasn't changed, but it can be a little bit harder for students to wrap their head around that piece. And so I think that can contribute to potentially not scoring as well as they would have liked.
Maisha, you're nodding your head along. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, that's the main point I want to bring up, that it's kind of dynamic, which obviously you can't do if it's on paper. But it's not a bad thing. I think, if you find that you are getting more difficult questions, instead of feeling more stressed, you could feel like, okay, maybe I'm doing a good job. But the curves, the scoring will still be done in a way where it is fair to everyone. So you don't have to worry about, is it the same if I'm getting a harder question wrong versus someone who's not getting, or someone who's getting like an easy question right. So it is different. That's why we definitely recommend practicing, even in a digital format.
Great segue. We have a ton of resources on our site that are actually practice tests. So a quick Google search of ACT practice test quad or quad education will bring it up, or SAT practice test quad. Both of the options will bring up some really awesome, if I do say so myself, practice tests. We've had our counselors go over the questions and just verify everything. So a really great resource to continue practicing those skills. With that being said, I'll pass it back to our wonderful panelists.
Okay, so what are the key differences between the SAT and ACT? We kind of mentioned these already, but there's different content, the structure is different, the scoring is different. So let's just go into a little chart showing you side by side. Feel free to screenshot this or just wait for the link later. But everything we mentioned before is kind of summarized here in terms of there being more different sections in the ACT, which includes science and the optional writing. The content focus is a little bit shifted because there is a science aspect, and the ACT also focuses a little bit more on grammar. The timing, like we said, if you find that you can focus better when it's like a shorter period of time, maybe the SAT is better for you. Again, these are things you have to figure out after you take practice exams. The scoring, like Dominique mentioned, is different. In terms of the math, it is crafted differently, the math content. For the SAT, you have some higher level math, which includes algebra and data analysis. Whereas for the ACT, it's a lot more straightforward. There is still algebra, but it's more also geometry questions and trig questions. And in both cases, there's no penalty for guessing. So just because in case you guess and you get a question wrong, you won't get any points taken off. So it's definitely better to take a guess and give it a shot rather than guessing.
I'll just jump in really quick before we move on to this. I just want to make the point. So we've talked about this a couple of times now. The SAT is shorter. However, you do get more time per question. And so that's something important to keep in mind. And so you actually do get a little bit more time to think, but you have less chances to get questions wrong. They're worth a little bit more because you're not doing as many questions. Whereas the way I almost see the ACT is that you just have this, it's relatively long, but it almost feels like rapid fire. Like you've got to get through this test super quickly. Just the math section as an example, you have 60 minutes and 60 questions. So you have an average of 1 minute per question. Yes, they're more straightforward, and so you can get through them super fast. But if you're not as strong, with just kind of seeing a question, knowing what to do and moving forward, if you prefer to kind of think about it and take your time with it, the ACT may be a better option. And so again, the only way to I can tell you all of this. The only way to really know is take the test. You'll notice that for yourself pretty quickly. And I usually have students take both, and before we even have a conversation, they're oftentimes emailing me and saying, "Oh, I already know which one I want to do." And we don't even have to go into it. Sometimes we do. And there's, certain questions we ask, and, there's all that work you can do with a counselor, but more often than not, I do find students that are just like so clear before we even have a conversation about it. And so that is truly the best way to figure this out without getting bogged down in I don't know about science. Well, how many questions is this and how much time per question? Just try it and you'll probably see pretty quickly. We can go to the next slide now. Perfect. So just to talk about some of the common SAT question types. So you have evidence-based reading. And so this is kind of your classic passage-based comprehension and analysis section. This also does show up on the ACT. There isn't a huge difference between the two as far as like what those reading sections look like. You'll get passages from different types of genres. So it may be like a fiction or literature kind of story. There may be historical documents. There may be passages about natural sciences. And that's something important to keep in mind too. You're still going to see these natural science, potentially focused articles, even outside of, what would be the formal ACT science section. And we can go to the next slide on this. And then, another piece of the SAT is the writing section. And this focuses on grammar, punctuation, and effective language use. And so it really kind of involves reading the passage and improving it in some way. And so really being able to tell using certain grammar rules, how do you use commas effectively, how do you use a semicolon, things like that, that can get a little bit kind of, granular in some ways, but it is pretty easy to practice those things and learn them if you're not super fluent with them. And so reading comprehension is a little bit more obscure when it comes to like really honing in that skill, but this is a way that you can really kind of tactically and concretely identify the pieces. I actually don't know when to use a comma before and, or I don't know how to use a semicolon or whatever it is. And that could be a really easy way to improve your score. And this is also just for what it's worth, relatively similar to what you see on the ACT. And so when it comes down to reading and writing, it's not so different. Where you're going to see most of the differences is one, with the timing of everything, and two, with the math and that science section that I mentioned.
So for the ACT, as Dominique mentioned, the English section is not that different. Like, the grammar is still there, the punctuation is still there, sentence structure, rhetorical skills, but it's more based on, correcting these errors that you'll kind of see in these questions. For example, is the comma in the right place? Should there be a semicolon here? Is the syntax correct? So the goal of these questions is to have the students improve the style and the clarity of the written passages. So it's more based on these the grammatical style and syntax rather than comprehension. And for the math section, like we mentioned earlier, there's algebra, geometry, and trig. So these questions are mostly testing how your problem-solving skills are, how's your interpretation, how's your analysis ability. There will be charts and graphs, and how can you analyze this quantitative information. So it's a lot more of, I guess, math comprehension in a way, because you're kind of assessing mathematical skills and doing data analysis rather than only actually solving equations.
All right, awesome. So we talked a little bit about this. So how do I figure out which test is correct for me? This is 100% a question of personal taste and preference, and your working style and whatever kind of just feels right to you. We mentioned, right, you'll see here, if you excel in science, or if you prefer really straightforward math questions, or if you can work relatively quickly and just kind of get through these questions, the ACT might be better. If you are a little bit better with like data analysis, which will show up a lot more in the SAT math section, or you thrive when you have some time to really think deeply about a question, you might do better with the SAT. Most colleges do not prefer one test over the other. But I will say again, because the SAT does no longer offer the essay, and you want to take that essay, if you're going to a very specific kind of writing-based program, you may want to opt to take the ACT. Definitely make sure. I would check online, just double check the testing requirements, but usually this really does just come down to preference. And like I said, the best way to figure that out is take a diagnostic, and you'll probably see pretty quickly which one feels better to you.
All right, let's shift gears to kind of tips on how to study. So here are 3 study strategies that we recommend. So number 1 is to consider a tutor or a counselor. Having a tutor is really helpful because, of course, you are an independent student who knows how to take their own tests, but having someone actually give you feedback after you take your tests and kind of see where you're scoring high, where you're scoring low, can be really helpful, someone to address whatever weaknesses or strengths that you have. This can also give you an opportunity to structure some sort of study plan with somebody and have accountability, so you can kind of check in and make sure that you are following whatever study schedule that you have planned out. So having a tutor is helpful in many ways, but it's also not necessary. So it depends on you yourself. If you think that having a tutor is something you can benefit from, we would recommend it. Number 2 is doing practice tests. We cannot emphasize this enough. Taking the test in a timed format, in a condition that you'll be taking it the day of. So let's say, waking up early in the morning and doing it. These things can really help you get seriously prepared and feel more comfortable the day of the actual exam. And again, reviewing these practice tests is crucial to getting better at taking these exams and getting better at recognizing the types of questions. And lastly, a study routine. It's really great to get a handy dandy planner or use Google Calendar and just set aside some time every week to dedicate solely to either the SAT, ACT, or both. We know that you are all very high achieving students who have many, many things on their plate, extracurriculars, sports, internships, etc. But this is also now, especially now that schools are bringing back these exam requirements, it is an important part, and you want to make sure that you do dedicate enough time to studying and doing the best that you can. But really dedicating enough time to do not only practice questions, but also practice tests.
Awesome. And then I'll just jump into some general test taking tips. You've probably heard a lot of these before, but it's good advice. That's probably what we've heard it before. Practice with, we just talked about this, right? So just practice with time sections to really simulate test conditions. It's not going to help you if you finish the ACT math section in 2 hours because you don't know what it's like to work under that time pressure. And so it doesn't give you an accurate depiction of how you'll do on test day. When I worked with students as an ACT tutor, we would oftentimes come up with, I'm thinking of the reading section where you get 4 passages and they're all different types, like there's a natural science passage. Don't quote me on this. It's been a minute since I've looked at it specifically, but there's like a science focused passage and there's a literature focused passage and there might be one about history, but it's always the same 4 in the ACT. And so I would have them go through it and then we would kind of decide, okay, let's do the easiest one first, whichever one you think is easiest. Get that out of the way, and then you can really focus the most of the time on the harder ones. Sometimes we would say, let's do your hardest one first. And that way, if you're running out of time at the end, you can really speed through that last one that's relatively easy for you. And that you won't lose as many points because it's already going to be pretty easy and it won't take you too long, even if you're kind of nervous and you're not focused because you're running out of time. And so that may seem contradictory, and it is, but it really came down to, what worked best for that one student. And we would practice over and over and over again until we figured out, okay, your brain works in this way and you don't get as nervous or frazzled when you do the hard one first. Maybe the other student I'm tutoring, they had the opposite reaction, right? And so again, very personal. That's why working with a tutor is awesome, because they can really get to know you and just do this process with you over and over again to really figure out what works. As far as kind of the strategies for answering questions, of course, process of elimination always works for multiple choice. That's a great kind of just, catch-all kind of strategy for a multiple choice test. And then, of course, make sure you're reading the questions carefully. This is where the time practice comes in as well. To get more efficient, you need to practice more, and you'll need just more time to be able to read these questions carefully. So if you're super nervous and you feel pressed for time all the time, you're not going to be reading as carefully as if you've taken a million practice sections and you know exactly how much time you have and you can really sit down and relax and read things carefully. And then as far as handling difficult questions, you can skip challenging questions and return to them later. Obviously, like staying calm and focused is the name of the game. And really where that comes from is just practice, practice, practice. Test anxiety is real. That's a big thing that I talked about with my students that I tutored, and so just another reason to work with a tutor and really kind of come up with specific strategies that might work for you individually.
So here are 3 common myths and misconceptions about these standardized tests. Number 1 is only perfect scores get you into good colleges. I mean, that's definitely not true, because like we said before, your application is a holistic review. They will be looking at not only your scores, but you as an individual. They'll be looking at your personal statement to see who you are. They'll be looking at your grades, how is your GPA, what particular courses do you really excel in. You can get into a good college even if you do not achieve your goal score. As long as you have a strong application process overall, your ACT or SAT should not make it or break it. Number 2, you should take the SAT or ACT as many times as possible. So of course you have the right and the freedom to do so if you'd like, but we say that it's not particularly helpful. You know, you reach a point where you kind of plateau, and that's fine. It's also quite exhausting and, you know, costly to take the exams over and over again. Um, Especially because you know there are certain schools that do allow super scoring, so you shouldn't be having to take it 4 or 5 times. You know, even a couple times should be enough for you to kind of feel good about a score that you think was, you know, your best, you, showing who you are best when it comes to taking exams. And number three, the ACT is easier than the SAT, or vice versa. Now that we've shown you more of the details and the differences, we know that this is not necessarily true. It really depends on the person, it depends on the student's strengths, it depends on where your interests are, it depends on how you work under different time crunches. So it's very, very variable. So yeah, those are some myths and misconceptions. Yeah.
I think we went through most of this, so we can skip the next few slides and just go to the last one, just so we have time for questions. I think one thing just to add, as far as the taking it as many times as possible thing, I also see students get trapped into thinking that they're going to do better, and they just suck so much energy into it that they're actually taking away from other things that they would be wanting to do. Not only just like, oh, I wish I had more time to hang out with my friends, like things that will actually really enhance your application more than maybe getting one extra point on the ACT. And so that's kind of a calculated kind of risk that you might want to take, and that's, you know, something you might want to talk about with a quad counselor or a parent or whomever. Just have that conversation. You know, is this going to take away from something that actually will really enhance my application? But yeah, everything else, Aisha, that you said was spot on. Really quickly before we go into Q&A, just test day preparation again. I think you've heard this before. Of course, make sure you get a good night's sleep. One thing I'd add to this is, you know, sometimes I'll hear people say, well, get a good night's sleep and then eat your breakfast. And like, if you don't usually eat breakfast, don't start the day of. You know, so for some people, it is important to have something in your stomach and, you know, have your coffee, whatever it is. But don't think that making like a green smoothie and having a cup of coffee for the first time in your life on the day of is going to help you. It might actually make you feel worse. And so whatever you do, just make sure you're sticking to your routine and you figure out what that is. The other thing, of course, all of the materials that you'll need. I know that the the SAT provides a calculator now, but the ACT, you would still need to bring one. You need your ID, you'll need your admission ticket, you may want to bring some snacks. Just have all that ready the night before so you're not really nervous in the morning. Another thing I would throw into this as well is sometimes, you know, some of you will be lucky and you'll be able to take it right at your school during the school day. And maybe that'll be all you need to do and you don't have to worry about it. But most students may need to sign up for another test that happens at a different high school. Some students have to travel pretty far to take the SAT. And so make sure you're thinking well in advance when you might like to sign up for the test. One, because it'll hold you accountable, right? Until you have a test date, you might be a little lax about your preparation. But if you know for sure you're taking it on August 1st, it's going to just help you like really push yourself to get to that point, especially if you spent the money on it. But the further in advance you can sign up, the better, because oftentimes some pretty popular test dates, especially closer to the fall, tend to fill up pretty quickly. And so you don't want to be stuck, oh man, every test center, every high school in my hometown is filled up and now I have to drive for 3 hours. Maybe I have to spend the night in a hotel because it's such a far drive. And then you're all off your schedule, and right, that can kind of snowball. And so as much as you can, you know, come up with a good plan and make it as easy for you as possible to get into a test that, you know, is pretty much closer to home, the better off you'll be as far as your routine and just the stress levels on the morning of. I don't know if there's anything for you to add, Aisha.
No, I think you got it right. I definitely echoed the don't change your routine the day of, because that can only get you more nervous.
Awesome. So this actually brings us to our Q&A. I encourage our audience to drop in their questions for Dominique and Maisha in the chat if you haven't done so already. We'll give you a moment to do that. And I have a question for you myself, ladies. It's a question that I'd love to ask all of our panelists. I think it's always helpful to know sort of the one piece of advice you have for parents as well as students who are either going through the SAT, ACT themselves, or of course have their child or the student going through it. The number one piece of advice.
For me, it's start early. You really can't start early enough. One thing I love about the SAT is that they do offer kind of leveled versions of the test, the PSAT. So for 8th and 9th graders, for 10th graders, for 11th graders. And so that can be a good way to jump into it and just get a feel of what that might look like. Another just important thing is really just, again, giving yourself that time to do the exploration. I'm working currently with a rising 10th grader who's doing the early candidacy program through Quad, and I just had her take the 2 diagnostics. And she did pretty well, and there's certainly some room for improvement. But, this is a great time for her to at least figure out which test she wants to take, because now we still have 2 really solid full years, her 10th grade year and her 11th grade year, to really hone in on, okay, you've chosen the SAT. Now let's make sure that you do some practice, through Khan Academy and see how that goes. And if that's not enough, then we still have time to get you a tutor, and you can do a very full, tutoring program and with no rush if that ends up needing to be what we do. Or, if she does really well and she improves just a little bit and makes it up to that goal score that she's really looking towards, she can take it early, right? There's no reason to not take it early as well, especially when we know that junior year is typically the time that students will take these standardized tests, but it's also the time where they're taking their heaviest course load, and they're probably the most involved in extracurriculars that they've been in. It's this really high pressure, high stress year. And so taking it early is not for everyone, but especially for students who maybe have taken higher level math classes or something earlier on in high school, there's no reason not to get it out of the way and just have those scores locked in and have it be one less thing for you to worry about. So either way, it's a win-win. You either get it out of the way, you have scores you're happy with, or you have all the time in the world to readjust, figure out new ways of studying or programs or whatever you want to do to get to that score you want.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I would add that as a parent, I would definitely, take the initiative to help your student make a plan, whether it be kind of finding opportunities that you think would be good for your student, like going to a test prep program or signing up for a tutor or a counselor, and checking in with your student to see, what do they need is important. Another piece of advice would be to try your best not to compare. I know it's hard when all your peers are taking exams at the same time, and you may hear from other parents how other students are scoring, and you might have these expectations in your head, but definitely try not to let that get to you, or try not to have this, golden score in your head, because of course your student may reach that, but even if they don't, that doesn't mean that's the end of times. As we said before, this is not the only part of your college application. And as Dominique said, if you start early, there'll still be time to improve. So yeah, I guess do your best not to stress out your students too much.
I love that. Thank you both. Let me quickly check the chat. I don't see any questions in the chat. We are right on the hour, so I'll give maybe our audience a minute or two to add in any sort of last minute questions they have. And of course, if you have any kind of questions later, we highly recommend reaching out to us, whether it's through booking a one-on-one consultation with one of our admissions counselors, or each of you signed up for this webinar, of course. So you have that email. Feel free to respond directly, and we'll make sure we get that question answered, whether that's in the form of a video. We actually have an entire webinar about the digital SAT. So if that's something you need or you'd like, definitely let us know, or some sort of resource, whether it's a practice quiz. We even have a really awesome tool that converts your ACT score to your SAT score. So you can kind of see the equivalent, or the SAT, the ACT. So any sort of resources, anything that we can make, anything that we can do to make this process easier for you, that's what our team is here for, right? Let me check the chat again. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat. So I'd love to bring this webinar to a close. Maisha, Dominique, thank you so much for being here. Audience, thank you so much for being here and being engaged. Again, we look forward to seeing you on those free consultations, those one-on-ones. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.